Welcome back to Active Ingredients. Tom Merriam joins me today. He's head of corporate strategy and chief of staff to the CEO at Organon, and someone who's built a career out of solving complex problems at scale. Tom started in the MedTech space before moving into consulting with McKinsey, and more recently in the pharma world at Lupin and Organon. Tom's journey is all about channeling energy, his own and his team's, to drive performance, create access, and deliver real impact. Today, we're diving into what drives that energy, how he found a home for it in leadership, and what excellence really looks like when you're wired to think differently. Tom, great to have you on Active Ingredients.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for the intro, and thanks for having me. I know, when you reached out, it just, it seemed like such an exciting concept, right? I know earlier in our lives sort of thing, back before LinkedIn exists, before these podcasts exist, I had always been looking for a resource like this, right? And kind of landed on biographies and business books and the like. But for me, one of my mantras, whether it's my work life or my personal life, is just kind of having an open door, right? It's if I can spend some of my own energy to help somebody else with their journey in life, that's time well spent to me, regardless of what it's on. So, just very happy to be on the podcast with you, and hopefully, some of this advice that I can share or my experiences can help at least somebody out there.
Yeah, and I've really enjoyed all of our conversations. We've had coffee in Manhattan, so then we've been able to talk through teams, all of this kind of good stuff. Every discussion I've had has been really interesting, and I think you've got a really nice viewpoint on it. So we always kick off these podcasts, though, with the same question. Okay, so the starting theme is, what do you think are the three key ingredients of a successful leader, and why?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question to start off with. And just generally, I'm excited to listen and hear the rest of the podcast as this, as it starts to get rolling as well. But the first one for me is really around, vision, right? Or you can call it mission orientation, that sort of thing, right? So fundamentally having a view of where you're going, how you're going to get there, and importantly, how you articulate it in a compelling manner so that whether it's any of your stakeholders, really, be that internally, externally, peers, team members, so that they can really buy into it and understand, the why and why it's so important. The second one I would underscore is just being very thoughtful, right? So, whether that's in the answers that you're finding or whether that's in the approach that you take, both to find those answers as well as in the implementation, I think it's just incredibly important to be thoughtful. And then the final one that I would just underscore, and, I think in healthcare, it's all too easy for us to take it for granted a little bit, but it's just being caring, right? So, in healthcare, it's pretty straightforward for us day in, day out, caring, putting the patient first, right? But it's not just about patients, right? It's about your team, it's about your organization, it's about your peers, and how you really show up on a day-to-day basis in order to kind of get the most out of whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, so vision, mission orientation, being thoughtful and caring.
Yep.
Absolutely spot on. I love those. So what we normally do in this podcast is try and understand a little bit more about you as well, where you've come from, the background or those early years. So let's step back and give the listeners a chance to get to know what you were like at maybe school and college, and whether a career in life sciences leadership was always destined.
Yeah, for sure. So, life's a journey, right? And so, if I look back at my life, it's actually kind of an interesting answer. I do think that a career in life sciences was kind of always destined for me, in certain ways. So, I've had kind of a wild ride, on the healthcare side. When I was in my early teens, I was diagnosed with a condition that was, pretty serious. And I was just so thankful to have grown up outside of Philadelphia and been able to go to the children's hospital and everything, and just have access to just, totally top flight premier physicians in order to get this situation managed, right? Also an amazing seat to the power of innovation in our industry, right? Like, it was probably 5 years ago, I was able to be genetically ruled out of having that condition, right? So really a wild ride, thinking that you've got this, potentially life-ending situation going on, and then to be able to say, oh no, actually I'm in the clear. But that experience of living under that cloud for, the better part of 2 decades, really just embedded a deep appreciation within me for access to healthcare. And, it was probably, when I was 14 or 15 years old, I kind of thought to myself, like, more people should have access to this sort of healthcare, right? And so it kind of set me on that path, right? Of, whatever I'm going to spend my energy doing, how can I, help those people, right? And so even to this day, right, when people ask me just like very succinctly, what's your mission or that sort of thing, the most succinct answer I can give them is expanding access to healthcare. It's something that I care deeply about, and I've really had the privilege of being able to drive for that thus far in my career.
Yeah, and it is wild how often there are these moments in people's lives in their early kind of formative years where, for good or for bad, they do realize the importance of the industry, okay, and the products or the services that are made. And it is really interesting how, some people don't have any kind of viewpoint on it until way later in life. And then, there's a lot of bad press sometimes about the industry until you need something instantly. It's like COVID, when COVID came along, for there to be like almost like an expectance to have these vaccines within such a short period of time. And all of a sudden you had, these companies that people didn't know were on the front page of the newspaper. Like, it was all of a sudden happened so fast.
Totally. And Project Warp Speed and everything, right? Like so much of the technical operation side of things, just as much as the innovation side of things, right? I mean, it was like a military level industrialization that just happened like that. And it's just amazing, right? Like, a couple of years down the road now, pharma's the bad guy again.
Oh, I know. But, deep down in your heart, the great thing is, though, you understand the importance and that really deep appreciation, as you said, of the industry. Not everybody follows the same path. Some people are like, I fell into the industry, but for you, there seems to be some real resonance.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
So, when you were at kind of college, you coming out and thinking, right, what am I going to go and do next? Where did you find yourself? Was the first role, am I right in thinking the first role that you took really in industry was actually in the MedTech space?
Yeah, for sure. So, I went for my undergrad. I did a bachelor's of engineering degree at Stevens Institute of Technology, which is, right here in New Jersey, over in Hoboken. And it was, definitely as I was applying for schools and looking for schools, seeing the kind of healthcare program that they run there and their deep ties with, the medical device and pharma world up here in northern New Jersey was definitely a draw for me. But then also just, all of my internships, it just was almost like it was meant to be, right? So my internships while I was there were kind of all ended up being at medical device players. And so then, when, my time was coming to a close there and it was time to think about that next chapter, going to a company like Becton Dickinson just, made a lot of sense.
Yeah. So not a bad place to start, though. Becton Dickinson, good player in those days.
Yeah, for sure. It was under Ed Ludwig's leadership at that point in time. So, back in the, I think it's the aughts. I think that's what we call that decade when it starts with zero aughts. Yeah. But yeah, it was crazy. So I was one of those, let's say ambitious or crazy kids that took on one of these rotational development programs, right? So it was one of those things where you commit for 3 years to doing 3 different jobs for 12 months at a time and literally moving each time, right? So, I was in pretty rural Baltimore, up in rural Maryland, up north of Baltimore. I was back in New Jersey doing research and development, and then once again, kind of in rural Connecticut, moving around. And it was, if I reflect back on on that first one, right? It was relatively isolating, I would say, outside of the work environment, but just such a rich opportunity to do things that just you wouldn't really think of, right? And so I'm a big fan of those types of programs, especially in the manufacturing or research and development type space, right? Getting into the nuts and bolts of what really drives the industry. That first role I had was actually at a manufacturing facility making diagnostic equipment, which did really jive pretty well with this whole expanding access to healthcare thing. We were making tuberculosis testing equipment at that time, and we were just having a really hard time keeping up with the demand, right? Just the raw amount of demand that was happening at that time. Units for the PEPFAR program to go into Africa, also heavy demand coming out of India. I was lucky to learn a lot of things down there, right? So, you get your lean kind of feet under you. You do a lot with, your green belt Six Sigma type programs. But fundamentally I saw, I worked closely with this guy, Mike Wilt, who was the plant manager there at the time. And just, it was my first real window into how do you maintain the morale of a group of people that need to execute every single day, every single week, every single month, right? And how do you maintain that energy and that momentum to continue delivering? And so you get this incredible window, at a very formative time in your life to kind of see and understand how, a group of probably 200 people in that factory come together in order to accomplish goals. But you can also see, and I love the name of the podcast, Active Ingredients. I got this tremendous opportunity there to be that, like, the active ingredient as well, right? So Mike placed some incredible trust in me. He allowed me to fundamentally redesign the production line of our most important product, right? The one that was back ordered by that exceptional demand. And soup to nuts, really, from the flow of the product to the flow of the input materials, redesigning and reimagining this whole space. I was able to, or we were able to, as a team, almost double the output of this production line with really, like, minimal capex, right? And this is going back 2 decades ago, but it was just incredible to see how a well articulated and a well executed change management program, where you got buy-in from the right people, you can do some pretty amazing things in just like a very short amount of time, right? And so really cool learnings. But I think also one of the things in my approach that I try to do is I try to flip things around and say, okay, not just how did that happen or why did that happen, but how can I make sure that things like that happen for others as well going forward, right? So that's, I think, a hallmark of my approach now as well, is just trying to give others those types of opportunities, as they're coming up, in order to, affect similar amounts of change. I'm blessed that the problems that I'm dealing with have grown in scale, from over the decades, but the opportunities have just grown equally,
Yeah. And it seems like it's a great opportunity for you to get to, as you said, working in a 200-person site, very well established. You've been given a lot of trust and, ability to make impact. Did you start to understand yourself at quite a fast pace, like your energy within that environment? How did you settle within that set network?
Yeah, totally. It's it's a fat, right? So there's this amazing quote, and I really should someday figure out who it was who said it. But it's one of the ones I go back to, right? That the most difficult managerial challenge you will have in your entire life is that of managing yourself, right? And so I love the question, Tom, about, like, understanding oneself and understanding one's energy, right? I think back to let's go to kind of that third rotation that I was in, right? So when I was up in rural Connecticut, and I had the opportunity, like really my first opportunity to lead a big group of people, right? And so it was this team of 13 folks, and we were doing product rework at a syringe plant. I don't know if you've spent much time doing product rework, but it can be tedious. It can be boring. It could be easy to kind of like, lose focus or lose sight of what you're trying to do, because it's just, you're in this windowless factory, and, what's going on? Why does this matter? Right. So, it was kind of a difficult first gig to get thrown, right? Because you've got this group of people that you need to bring together, and you need to somehow motivate them to do something that really, like, humans weren't, didn't evolve to do, right? Humans didn't evolve to do syringe rework in a windowless factory, right? What ended up happening in this particular situation was we scaled, right? So we went from 13 to 45 people. We went from one shift 5 days a week to 3 shifts 5 days a week, right? So we went from 8 hours of production to 24 hours of production. And so, doing all the normal things of, vetting, hiring, onboarding, those sorts of things, but also, how do you manage as a young individual this group that now is working 24 hours a day, right? And so I got this really cool window into my own energy, right? But then, also, how do you manage the energy of this group, right? So, as we were ramping up, I found myself where I would work for 24 hours, 36 hours, maybe take a nap in the car, in the parking lot, to get things up and running, right? Because, really was an entrepreneurial opportunity. And I think that's, a little bit what you get sucked into when it's a entrepreneurial opportunity. I quickly, after working that kind of pace for, a week, 2 weeks sort of thing, started to get some, kind of side-eyed glances from some of the other folks at the factory. Like, what are you doing, Tom? This isn't like this isn't a medical residency. You're not expected to do this sort of stuff. And it was just one of these moments where I kind of said to myself, like, it isn't a medical residency, but clearly that's how I'm wired. Right. And that's clearly the energy that I want to bring to things, because I care deeply about what I'm doing. And so, that really was a bit of a pivot point for me, where I decided that I was going to go do an MBA, and I was going to decide to, try to work on different things, and try to use my energy in different ways. But it was also just this, this amazing opportunity, right, where you got 3 shifts of people working at different hours of the day, and thinking about how do you motivate them to take on a task, right? So, like, before moving on, I'd love to just dive into that like leadership challenge, right? Because, I'm a pretty competitive guy, right? I think most people who know me will cop to that on my behalf. But as long as you have, in a medical device manufacturing facility, the right quality systems and everything in place, getting a little bit of competitive juices flowing is really a at least for us at that point in time, was kind of the unlock, right? And so, in any kind of manufacturing environment, it's really kind of best practice to have handover meetings at the beginning and end of any shift, right? So we structured everything where each shift was 8.5 hours long, with a 30-minute break in the middle, 30-minute handovers. And during those handovers, we had, the big whiteboard, right, where we would track our KPIs. And so, at that point in time, I wanted to be there for, all 3 startup meetings every day, or at least 2 of the 3, is what I kind of, eventually admitted that I had to, like, that, being there for all 3 was probably not sustainable. This is before I, got married or had kids or anything. So, not much else was infringing on my time, but, we, by managing those KPIs, we were able to get those competitive juices flowing across the shifts, right? Obviously in a good natured way. And it really, I felt like it built the camaraderie that we all had. And it was just an opportunity to get people focused on something that they could care about, right? And so, I was never going to get them to care about, the rework of each and every individual syringe when we're processing, whatever 50,000 syringes a shift, right? So, finding that thing that they could care about, right? And getting the team ignited a little bit around that and running, daily competitions or weekly competitions or whatever it is in order to find out, who could be that competition's winner sort of thing. I found that to be interesting, right? And obviously it's when I zoom out, that's a microcosm, right? And it's a small experience. It was a formative one for me to have early on, but it just underscores for me, this going back to this vision and mission orientation and how important it is to have the ability to translate what it is that you or the organization is trying to accomplish in a way that people can care, right? Because I truly believe that, no matter what the system is or no matter what it is that you're trying to do, if you can't find a way for your people to care, you're going to have a really, really difficult time accomplishing whatever it is that you're after.
Yeah, and it's a great grounding though, as you said earlier. What a way to start within the tech ops world, within R&D. I imagine you in this windowless, windowless building,
going through shoes every 6 months from walking on the concrete. Oh yeah.
Yeah, trying to build culture. But I think as you said, it's a great chance from a formulative kind of leader to get something that works, because that's all that we really want when we're first in those leadership roles. You try different things, not everything works, but you need to then start stacking up more of them that do work than don't. So it's a great opportunity for you to say, right, that was good, I learned a hell of a lot, but you then went to business school. How was that a catalyst for change, and what happened next?
Yeah, totally. I mean, if I think about probably some of the most lucky situations that I was to find myself in, right? I would say getting into Harvard Business School is probably the number one, right? So I remember back those days when I applied to Harvard because I didn't want to have any regrets in my life. I didn't think for a second that I have a chance to get in. But boy, was I surprised when I did, right? But it was amazing, right? I got on campus and I started hearing from, these other, my classmates that they came from McKinsey or they came from BCG. I had no idea what a McKinsey or a BCG was, right? So, I'm 26, 27 years old, no clue whatsoever, right? And so I'm just nodding my head and saying oh yeah, that's interesting. Oh, they pay for your school? That's pretty cool. You don't have to pay for your own cell phone. They continue to pay for it even when you're not working. I don't get how that works, but okay, that sounds interesting. And so for me, it was just obvious to continue going into life sciences. So I ended up going to Novartis for my internship. And while I was there, I saw these McKinsey people kind of running around in the projects that they were working on. And there was this real click moment, right? Where, thinking about that energy that I wanted to bring to solving problems and trying to move the world forward in however little way I could, to seeing these people at McKinsey at the time, right, who were working with Novartis there. And this was back when Voss, before he became CEO, right, he was running the vaccines business that I was working at. He was the head of that, and obviously knew his background and how he was an MD from Harvard and then worked at McKinsey for a while before going to Novartis, and it clicked for me of oh, okay, cool. That's maybe a place for me, right? Maybe that's a place where my energy can feel at home. And so, I got back up on campus, right? And somehow talked my way in and passed the grueling interviews that they have there, and somehow ended up with a full-time role coming out of business school with McKinsey. But I mean, that arc, right? That arc from like, showing up on campus and just having no idea what these consulting firms even are, let alone what they do, to, being able to identify like, oh, that actually is a great home for my energy and for my aspirations. And being lucky enough that they actually wanted to have me. It just was amazing. And I think, one of the very, lucky breaks that I've had in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you and I have spoken before about perhaps in your earlier years, you were a little too ambitious.
Mm.
And maybe that McKinsey click moment was like ambition, problem solving, coming together at the same time. So you were there for 5 years. How did the actual, how did the click, the ambition, the curiosity of what you were good at, did it all just come together at the right time?
Yeah. I mean, I do think so. Right. And I think, to your point about being too ambitious, right? I think, the benefit of having some miles on me now, I've come to realize that you can really get wrapped around the axle if you try to control too much, right? Like fundamentally in your life and in your career, there's some big things that you can control, right? Like what school you go to, or what you study, or, the employers that you choose to work with, or, if you want to go down like a doctor route, like an MD, you obviously have a lot more control. But fundamentally, what I've now found in my life is that aside from those things, you just need to kind of stay focused on what's in front of you and do your absolute best, right? Because while you're driving down this highway of your career, right, these different on ramps and off ramps will show up, right? And you assess each one of those individually to say, like, is that what I want to do, or is that what I want to do, or do I want to keep doing what I'm doing right now for a little bit longer, right? But outside of that, trying to exert control is kind of an illusion, right? And I think it's a kind of a logical fallacy that you can fall into all too easy. And really, when you step back from it, right, the destination isn't even the ultimate goal, right? Because really the journey is the fun part. And so, I kind of went a little bit off topic there, but, to the specifics of your question, I think, yeah, I was very lucky in that regard, right? I put myself in the right position in order to get lucky. But I think at the end of the day, kind of discovering this consulting model and having had those prior realizations about my energy and how I like to work and what I want to try to accomplish in my life, it all just kind of clicked.
Yeah, great. Am I right in thinking, though, during those kind of first few years, you hadn't quite found the right mentors until maybe you moved out of McKinsey and into the industry proper?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, McKinsey in particular at that period of time, right, in kind of the mid 20 teens, there was a lot going on there, right? There was work with opioid manufacturers and the like, and that wasn't for me. I had turned that kind of work down multiple times, and just wanted to focus on really, for me at that point in time, I was fascinated by these like large scale transformational efforts, right? So how do you work with an executive leadership team and like kind of fundamentally chart a new path for the company, right? Like, okay, you've got this entity and they had a value engine, but somewhere along the line, something went off the tracks, right? And how do you find a way to continue to fix and fuel that value engine, right? And shut down particular resourcing elsewhere to fuel that value engine to continue driving a successful or reignite an organization, right? So I ended up focusing on that. But I'd say after about like 5 years or so, a lot more started to creep in around kind of how do you run a consultancy and not necessarily how do you continue to solve these problems for your clients, right? And of course you continue to do that. You always do that at a place like McKinsey, and there's wonderful growth opportunities, of course. But for me, after about 5 years, it just was kind of time to pivot. Um, and around that time, right, my wife and I, we were thinking about starting our family and everything. And so, slowing down a little bit, not working the 100-hour work weeks, that was becoming an attractive opportunity, I guess you could say. And I, at that time, had the tremendous opportunity to meet the CEO of Lupin Pharmaceuticals, just an absolutely amazing individual, and had the opportunity to join her and her leadership team down in Naples, Florida. And really, it was an opportunity for me to kind of apply all those things that I learned, but really get more into it on the operating side of things. So it just was the right place at the right time. And it's interesting, right? It's funny, going from the McKinsey, New Jersey office in your, early 30s to moving to Naples, Florida is not the typically traveled career path, believe it or not, right? And so I again got a lot of kind of sideways glances of like, Tom, what are you doing, sort of thing. And it was just like, well, I really believe in this company and I really believe in what they're doing, right? And it just was kind of the right place at the right time. And so it worked for me, it worked for my wife, it worked for our now family with my two daughters, right? And so it just was the right place at the right time. And if I think about it, right, the types of opportunities that were presented to me by taking that path less traveled have made like all the difference, right? Or at least thus far in my career have made all the difference, right? Not to quote Robert Frost too directly there. So like if I think about, right, when I joined Lupin, I was there for maybe 6 months before the pandemic started to really kind of pop off. And I remember getting this phone call from my CEO there and just saying, Tom, can you keep an eye on this, make sure that we stay ahead of it, right? And this was about the time that, in China, they were building those pop-up hospitals, right? So it hadn't really come out to the rest of the world or anything yet, and everybody was pretty unsure exactly how this was going to go. But, of course I said, of course I'll stay on top of it and make sure that we're good. And as things evolved, it was like, oh, wow, like this is going to be a real thing, right? Because, Lupin, not a lot of people know the name Lupin Pharmaceuticals, but they make like 7 to 8% of every single prescription dispensed in the United States, right? So, when you're thinking about supply chain disruptions on, call it, 1 out of every 11 or 1 out of every 12 prescriptions dispensed in the United States, all of a sudden that becomes a really big deal, right? And so, that was not the kind of thing that and having direct ownership of that outcome was not really like the kind of thing that I was going to get at a McKinsey, right? And so being able to step into that and say like, okay, let me deploy my toolkit, right? Let me, let me pull in, the best practices that I've seen, let me set up a matrixed team structure so that we can stay on top of everything, the right cadence for everybody to come together. And let's very clearly and stay laser focused on a dual mandate, right? So we set up a dual mandate for ourselves. First was, we got to keep our people safe, right? First and foremost, right? Let's make sure that and as the pandemic went on, right, that's almost impossible, right? Entirely, especially when you've got a large workforce in India, right? The infrastructure is just very difficult to keep everybody safe there, as well as everywhere else in the world, frankly. But so that was number one. And number two was we needed to keep the supply of product flowing as well, because we knew there would be some pretty dire circumstances if, all of a sudden 1 out of every 11 or 1 out of every 12 scripts, didn't show up at CVS, right? Or at Walgreens or wherever you pick your prescriptions up. It was just one of these formative experiences again that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't like taken that leap, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the coolest things about that whole experience, one of the things that I'm kind of most proud about, a lot of folks, they left the office and it took them a long time to come back. I mean, some people still aren't back, right? I mean, some people are still, not back in the office, or they're coming into the office 1 day a week sort of thing. As a leadership team, we decided after 4 weeks, we were going back to the office. Right. And when I say that to people, they're like, 4 weeks? Are you crazy? What? And it was about fairness for us. Right. So, in an office environment, sure, you have the privilege of not having to be there. Right. But in a manufacturing environment, in an R&D environment, they don't have the privilege to not come in. Right. Otherwise, people don't get their medicine. And that just wasn't right to us, right? It wasn't right to us that we would, expect, 10,000 employees in India in our manufacturing facilities to continue to come in and continue to supply product while we worked from our home offices, right? And so we made the decision pretty early on, probably about 4 weeks after we, first went into our home offices that we were going back in, right? And so, we, of course, again, following our dual mandate, had to make sure that everyone was safe. So we took those same policies and procedures that we put in place in the manufacturing facilities and implemented them in our offices. And we got right back to work. We didn't really have supply disruptions. I mean, there was some product that we were sending to the US via air freight because all the boats were shut down. And after, and the way the contracts work in the industry, you can't really take price due to something like that, right? Everybody was pushing back on any possible claim of force majeure. And so we were losing money on every prescription, right? Because of the cost of the air freight, but we still kept the product flowing because that was the right thing to do. It's funny, we talked about it earlier, right? Like all of these heroics that the industry went through to try to help during a major time of need, it all just kind of gets swept under the rug sort of thing. It was certainly an exceptional time, I think, in everybody's lives. Right. I'm just glad that I had been there to help and to lend my energy again to something that I thought was, very important. Sorry,
Yeah.
now I probably went a little bit off.
No, I love it. I love it. I also think that it shows that there's definitely a theme of commitment throughout all of this. You want to make sure that you do the best job you can. That's what I absolutely love about the answer that you gave there about proudest moment getting back into the office after 4 weeks, just something to really, really hold on to. The interesting thing, though, is the people around you must have been feeling similar. So what kind of team had you built, or what kind of team were you part of? What were what were the values or behaviors of the people that you were working with?
Yeah. It's interesting, right? In an environment like that, and working at generics companies don't have the type of margin structure that a lot of the other companies in our industry have, right? And so I would say in normal operations, you are just so laser focused on executing, right? And doing the absolute best that you can in that particular moment. And it gets heightened in a crisis, right?
Yeah.
And you find out a lot about team when that happens, right? And I think in many ways we were very blessed with the team that we had, right? Because we were able to very quickly coalesce around what matters, right? So if we think about that dual mandate,
Yep.
it sounds like such a click and an unlock, But in our so I referenced this like matrix structure that we set up, right, that we set up with, the executive leadership team, the functions going across one way and the geographies going across the other way, and making sure that, on a weekly basis, we're having all of these touch points to ensure that just nothing falls through the cracks, right? So very high focus on time together, spending time together talking about the most impactful things in order to very rapidly resolve issues. In our first meeting, I think it was, of the like executive team, that dual mandate was barely even a conversation, right? It was, it was brought up as like, this is, I think, what the dual mandate should be. And everybody just kind of nodded their head and they're like, yeah, that 100% is right. And it wasn't the kind of place, at least at that point in time. And, it's been 2 years or 2 years plus since I've been at Lupin, but it wasn't the kind of place where you would have debate for debate's sake, right? Like you would have debate if it made sense, and you would have specific debate about specific things and the merits of those specific variables in a model, right? And there wasn't like this like pride of like, oh, like I brought the solution to the meeting or whatever, right? It was very clear, like, okay, yeah, no, that dual mandate makes sense. Let's move on. All right, cool. Let's start talking. So that makes sense. Let's start talking about them. Like what do the policies need to be in order to ensure that people are safe while they're at their factory? Oh, wait, we also have to think about the buses on the ride to the factory. Okay. Oh, actually, a lot of these folks don't have great infrastructure. Can we think about their environments at home when they're not at the factory, right? And so then you start to get into the specifics and you start to piece together a plan. And so it just was that kind of team where just laser focused on the things that were going to move the needle and the things that can be done, right? So very action oriented. Yeah, I mean, I think, anytime you're in really a manufacturing driven company, that action orientation has to become paramount, right? Otherwise there's just too much to get done and it doesn't get done, right? So you just, out of necessity almost, you have to adopt that kind of working cadence.
Yeah, love that. And it must have, when we go back to your first leadership roles, either being in a manufacturing plant, being in R&D, at least you understand what that's all about. You understand the mechanics of those kind of leaders or those people. So then to manage crisis with your problem solving, moving the Rubik's Cube round, sounds like it was a great place for you to be. Again, right time, right place for your energy, enthusiasm, ambition. But what happened next? Because obviously you then worked with a really inspiring mentor and leader.
Yeah.
But your curiosity and ambition must have given you that moment to go, let me look elsewhere. What else is there? Where is this next opportunity where I can problem solve?
Yeah, totally. So, I think that's, if I look back at like my early years in life, like my really early years, right? Like I was just always intensely curious, right? And so I know just about drove my parents mad, right? With how intensely curious I was, right? And just their dual mandate of, keeping me alive and keeping me from getting lost as I tried to, figure out how the world works and everything, right? And that has never really left me, right? So, people will say statements about like being a lifelong learner and that sort of stuff. And like, while that truly applies, for me, that doesn't come from a place of like, oh, this is something I should be doing. It comes from this place of like, I just want to learn more, right? I want to understand how things work, right? And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the journey of life and the journey of a career, right? Is like, as you progress, your mind kind of opens up to how the world works, right? And these structures of how, functions and teams interact within a company, and how multiple companies interact in order to make an industry, and how multiple industries interact in order to make an economy, and how countries and their economies, come together to make the global economy, right? Like, so you get this view of of everything that continues to evolve, right? Um, and again, I had been at Lupin, I guess it was a little bit less than 5 years at that point in time. And a really interesting opportunity came up for me to join Organon up here in New Jersey, right? And it's just, the journey of life, right? So while we were in Florida, we had two beautiful baby girls. And I just began learning about some of these inequities and the just massive access issues that exist in women's health, right? And it, there's a variety of reasons. I was excited to come back up to New Jersey, but being able to sink my teeth into how do we actually start to move the needle on some of these really deeply entrenched issues around women's health, and how do we really create an engine for making progress on that was the thing that I bought into when it was, time for me to move on. And when I came over to Organon was just, how do we, craft this engine so that, again, we can improve access to healthcare, a little bit more specific to women's health in this regard. But, and it's been an incredible learning opportunity, right? Completely different environment, more innovative versus generic, right? Of course, we've got a large established brands business as well, but, how do you navigate these, global shifts and pulls in order to, at the end of the day, provide product to women who need it, but also to funnel more R&D dollars in to creating new novel therapies that solve areas of unmet medical need, right? So it really was kind of this novel opportunity that, just checked a lot of these boxes of things that I thought would be exciting. And it's one of those things where, like, going back to earlier, what I was talking about with, your career, and you're driving down this highway and on ramps and off ramps will come up, and, you're focused on what you're doing. But, when those things come up, I do feel like, you need to at least give them some thinking. Right. And I think that's ultimately what pulled me over to Organon, was just the scale of the need, and the potential for the opportunity to make things better for, women and girls all around the world.
Yeah, and it seems as though, you understand yourself, you understand where your energy is going to be best suited to what environment or what time. You and I also had a conversation in the past where you said, expanding access to healthcare helps when you have a deep, value of a day and a deep value of a dollar.
Yeah.
And at this moment, it's like it seemed to have come to a bit of a crescendo where timing was right to go and put all your energies into something really amazing.
Totally. Yeah, totally. I, wherever you heard that from, must be, just a brilliant guy. But, no, all jokes aside, right? The value of a day and the value of a dollar is something that I think deeply about, right? And it varies for everybody, but there's this kind of incrementalism, right? Of how do you continue to provide value, or how do you continue to move something forward that you care about, right? And so I forget again what professor it was, but kind of started out with like, oh, if you saw $100 bill on the sidewalk, would you pick it up? Well, yeah, of course. If you saw a $50 bill, yeah, of course. $20 bill, yeah, of course. $5 bill, yeah, of course. Dollar bill, yeah, I guess a quarter. Like where does it actually stop? Right, from like an incremental perspective. And so the reality, I think, in any system or organization is that every incremental bit counts, right? And so how do you find the optimal home for whether it's your dollars or whether it's your energy, right? And if we go back to the definition of energy, right, the energy is the capacity to do work, right? That's the physics definition of energy. And so, I think that, at least personally, one of the things that I really find foundational is how do you nurture your capacity for energy or your organization's capacity for energy, right? Or how do you nurture your organization's capacity to deploy dollars in pursuit of whatever the mission and vision is, right? And to take kind of another saying, I love to have kind of all of these little like mantras or sayings, but another one that really strikes me, right, is that this concept of progress versus perfection, right? And if you allow yourself to just focus on what perfect is, you oftentimes miss a lot of things, right? Or you miss a lot of opportunities. Whereas if you're focused on, let's make progress today, let's make progress in this moment, right? This value of a dollar, value of a day, right? And let's focus them on progress. And if you focus on the progress, at least in my life, I found that you actually end up getting a lot further in the long run by focusing on that incremental progress. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. I love that, because I think that perfection, as you say, is sometimes just unattainable. And also it can create, a misalignment of expectations. If you're setting this massive expectation, but you get 85% of the way there, 85% is not bad. Do you know what I mean? But sometimes 100% creates paralysis where you don't do any of it.
Yep.
But it seems as though you'd got to this point in, your career where, again, you've been able to have impact, but also learn from somebody that, again, is giving you the right kind of space, but the right mentorship at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just life is a journey, right? And going back a little bit, I think our purpose or mission is just to do the best that you can in whatever situation it is that you find yourself in, right? And I think there's a lot of integrity and honor in that, right? In that focus and in that delivery.
Yeah. And you've been able to adapt and move. I think, this discussion has been absolutely fantastic. You've given me some real, clarity on what makes you tick. Also, those click moments, the ability to create opportunity. And when you look back, all of these steps in your career and life, it really seems as though, you've been able to take the opportunity as it comes and also, enhance that energy. That is something that radiates from you. It's been really interesting discussion. What I want to do now, though, just for the last 5 minutes, is talk to you maybe a little bit more about the future.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to talk more about leadership or healthcare here, but have you got any advice or any thoughts on kind of the leadership within life sciences and what you think it's going to take for an industry to get itself on track?
Yeah. So, I think the future of our industry is something that is, ahead of corporate strategy, I think a lot about, right? So maybe touch on that, somewhat briefly, but, when I think about it, there's the thing that I can guarantee will happen in this industry is that we will continue to see change and that the pace of change will accelerate, right? Obviously, right? I think that's probably true for almost every industry, right? But the nuance there, right? There's three big things that I see that are going to drive that, right? One is innovation, right? And the good news is that from a pharmaceutical company perspective, we're well set up to handle that, right? So, I think you'll see really aggressive growth in modern modalities, right? So thinking your gene therapies, your peptide therapies. Also, I think probably some historically overlooked areas of biology, you'll start to see those emerge as well. There'll probably be a couple biotechs here and there that are focusing on things that people don't really know why they're focusing on. Like, we left that's part of chemistry behind 25 years ago, and then all of a sudden they're going to be worth $5 billion to a Merck or a Pfizer or something, which leads into kind of the second piece, which is M&A, right? So, in pharma, M&A is just like such a well-trodden path. We kind of know what to expect, right? You'll have these biotechs that pop up and they get valued at multiple $1 billion and they get gobbled up by the big pharmas. You'll see some combinations thereof, right? You'll probably continue to see other spin-outs like Organon and the like. But I think what gets missed by a lot of people and where a lot more attention should be going is what's happening in the channel, right? And so, if you think of players like CVS or you think of players like Cencora and how they're vertically integrating, and they're building these monolithic structures, right? So they've got these massive distribution capabilities. They're bolting on PBMs. They're bolting on now practices, right? In particular, healthcare practices that have a heavy index on writing pharmaceuticals, right? So it plays into their vertical integration. The power that they have over the entire system is only going to grow, right? And I think, in 5-10 years from now, a lot of people are going to be shocked and they're going to say, well, how did this happen? Like, how are they in such control? And, we're going to look back and say like, oh, they built it brick by brick, right? They followed a very clear plan to do it and like, ta-da, it's there. So I think that's a big one that probably a lot of people are not necessarily projecting into their models, right? So, what that would play out for pharmaceuticals is like gross to nets, they're going to go up. And then the third one is really just the regulatory landscape, right? And so, whether that's tariffs or whether that's changes at the FDA or things like volume-based procurement or other ways to squeeze these like long-listed / established brand products, I think you're going to see that trend is only going to intensify. And I think the hurdle for a pharmaceutical company to have really a crack policy team is only going to become like, the hurdle comes down, the need for a crack policy team is only going to increase, right? So being able to be in the room when these discussions are happening, and it might not even be to shape the dialogue, right? Obviously, you want to try to shape the dialogue when you can, if you have a strong perspective that's going to move things forward. But also, it's just sometimes to get some information so that you can plan effectively, right? I mean, like when we think about these tariffs, right? Like nobody really fundamentally knows exactly what's going to happen, right? But at least by being a part of the conversation, you can start to model that out and say like, okay, like, where could this possibly go, right? Let me make sure that I'm prepared for it with, regardless of how it comes. So I think the industry is it's going to be fast. I mean, it has been fascinating what pharma has done and what the healthcare industry has done, right? But I think it's only going to become more and more. And then, also, on the leadership side of things, I think really, there's fundamentals about like getting clear on who you are and what is your value that you bring not just to an organization but a team, and like what is your kind of brand, right? Or your perspectives that you bring to a leadership environment, because having that kind of premeditated and very thoughtfully laid out just sets you up to be in a position where you can execute, dramatically better than your peers, especially in times of disruption, right? And then I think, also it's just, an opportunity to continue building your tribe, right? And I think that, the healthcare industry is small right now. It's a small world. It's only going to get smaller as we go forward, right? I think, as AI comes in and the like, you're going to be able to do a lot more with a lot less. And so continuing to build your tribe, whether it's people who are further in their career journeys than you are, or your peers, or potential team members who, will help power you and your mission vision as you go forward. But I think, really it's what a time to be alive. Frankly, it's going to be fascinating going forward how everything continues to evolve.
Yeah. And I think if you can stick to your active ingredients too, from a leadership perspective, that vision, the mission orientation with a thoughtful, caring leader, that is what people are looking for now. When you're an executive looking to make a change, there is still a little bit of bias of wanting to join certain companies, but it's still in the process. People are joining leaders more than they're joining a corporate brand.
I
So
agree. And people get caught up in what is a lot, not in what can be, right? So, this whole, I want to be at such and such firm, right? Like those perceptions are formed around what currently is, right? And so spending some time to get a vision on how things will evolve and you can think to the future of what could be, right? I think that really opens up your mind and your vision to what could be a good fit or where you can take your energy and what you can do.
yeah, that what is versus what could be. I love that. Right. So Tom, we've come to the end of our discussion. We've gone back in time to see what got you into the life sciences. We've spoken a lot about, how you've learned throughout your career, being able to take those opportunities and also giving us some real clarity on what you think is going to be happening next. I have absolutely loved the discussion today. It's been absolutely fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed it.
I have so much, Tom. It's so good to see you, and thanks again for thinking of me and reaching out. Very happy to have come on, and wishing you all the best. And for everybody listening out there, hopefully they've been able to find a couple things that are helpful for them. And if so, then it's well worth the time here for me. That's for sure.
Perfect. Thank you.